Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to take a trip back to the farm I grew up on with my grandparents, and I want to talk about ground for growth. Now, many of you growing up probably heard either Aesop's fables, or if you're a person of faith like I am, grew up reading the Bible and hearing the stories of the Bible, in particular, the parables of Jesus. Now, a parable is a simple story that's used to illustrate a life lesson, often moral or spiritual. Same thing we see with the fables of the ancient Greek world. Now, some of the best known storytellers in history who use parables or fables to convey life lessons, I would say the two, in my opinion, that were the best of the best at telling that story were Jesus from the Bible and the Greek fabulist Aesop. Now, if we look throughout history, other individuals also used either fables or parables or similar stories. Confucius, Buddha, Mohammed immediately come to mind, but we see these stories told all throughout cultures around the world. Africa, Australia, South America, other major cultures all had their own unique stories, many of their parables and fables passed on for generation fact, many of the parables in these little short life lesson stories that many of us grew up hearing have made their way to the big screen. I mean, think about movies like Bambi or The Jungle Book or The Lion King or The Monkey King. Now, also think about from Greek and Roman mythology, the heroic tales of Hercules, the Odyssey, the Clash of the Titans. Three movies, and Hercules, how many times has that movie been done and redone? Now, from Norse mythology, we get Thor, we get Odin, we get Loki, and we've seen that through the Avengers series that recently has come to play. But when we think about these parables, these fables, these life lesson stories, many of these stories used a human character to teach some type of life lesson, but others used an animal or sometimes an inanimate object to share a moral or a spiritual or a leadership truth. Now, today's lesson is going to center around one of those stories. In fact, it's a parable from the Bible that is probably one of the most familiar that Jesus told in his writings. It's found in the book of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 3 through 8. Let me share the story and let's break it down. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell among the path and the birds came and ate it up. Other seed fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. The seed sprang up because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Now other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. But still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, some 100, some 60, and some 30 times what was planted. Now, every parable, every fable teaches us a life lesson. And this parable is no different. This parable points out a very simple but a very poignant truth that's often overlooked or ignored today. And that lesson is this: growth hinges on the environment. Now, I don't want to get into the spiritual applications of this today. I want to simply focus on the story, and the lesson it teaches is that growth hinges on its environment. Think about the story itself that I just shared. Where the sower casts the seed matters. For any seed to grow to its full potential, it's got to be placed in an environment that's optimal for growth. Now, it can be planted in healthy soil, and if it's planted in healthy soil, that soil is going to help maximize the growth potential. You plant the same seed in unhealthy soil, it's not going to grow to its full potential. The quality of the soil matters. Now, in this parable, this truth, what I just shared, is self-evident. The seed itself, if we dig into the lesson of this story, the seed represents potential. The seed is the starting point of what is possible. I mean, think about it. You plant an apple seed in the ground, that is the starting point of a tree. You plant an acorn in the ground, that's the starting point of an oak tree. You plant a pine cone in the ground. That's the starting point of a massive pine tree. The seed represents potential. It's the starting point of what could be. Now, inside that seed, pick the seed, any seed, inside that seed resides all the latent potential of what that particular seed can grow to become. The very DNA of success is hardwired in the very fabric of the seed itself. Now, the soil that we see in this parable is the environment where the fabric of this seed is woven into a beautiful tapestry and put on display for all the world to see. From the seed comes what? The fruit. And that fruit represents expansion, increase, abundance, or success. So, this is why not only does the seed matter, the environment in which the seed is planted matters too. Now, going back and revisiting the story, think about what happens in the story as the sower goes out to sow seed. First off, some of that seed is scattered on the wayside. Now, think about the wayside. That's a road. And when you're looking at a road, how do we see that soil? It's compacted and it's hard. So when that seed lands on the wayside, it lands on a hard, compacted surface. So that seed is going to remain on the surface, exposed to the elements as well as food for the birds of the air or anyone walking down that road to trample and to crush the seed, so it never has an opportunity to germinate. When a seed lands on a compacted, hard surface, there's no opportunity for growth. When the soil is hard and resistant, the seed never has an opportunity to germinate and to grow. Now, the second place we see is seed falling in the rocky ground. And when you think about the rocky ground, oftentimes, and I've got some of those in my backyard, there are places in my backyard where there are a lot of rocks. And where those rocks are, the soil that sets on top of it is often very shallow. So while the seed has an opportunity to get some moisture and start through the germination process, the rocky soil itself prohibits the roots from going deep enough into the ground to really have an opportunity to take root and grow. So any seed falling on rocky ground where the soil is shallow, there's not a conducive environment for that seed to take roots deep enough to draw the necessary nutrients out of the ground for it to flourish and to grow. Now, the third place we saw seed falling in this parable was thorny ground. Now, the seed that fell on the thorny ground, that thorny ground also failed to provide a rich environment for growth because the competition of plants already established was robbing the seed of the vital nutrients that it needed to have the opportunity to grow, thus limiting its potential. And as that seed tried to make its way up out of the ground, the very plants itself choked the life out of that seed, never getting it an opportunity to rise to its full potential. So out of all the seed that was cast by this sower, who apparently was not real cautious in how he was sowing seed, only the seed that found its way to the fertile soil had the opportunity to germinate and to grow, to establish a strong root system that was necessary to maximize that plant's potential. So think about it this way. The highest quality of seed can never grow to its full potential unless it's placed in the proper environment. Again, growth hinges on the environment. So it's prudent for the sower to take note of where he or she is scattering seed. And in this parable, in this life lesson, we see a sower that wasn't paying close attention to where he or she was scattering seed. So if we break this story down and we want to bring it into the 21st century, who are the players in this dramatic life lesson? Well, the first is the sower. Now, this is the individual who's responsible for setting the stage for optimal growth. I mean, think about it. It's the farmer that tills the soil, and the farmer prepares the soil in advance to receive the seed. He tests the soil to determine whether or not the soil maintains and has in its mixture all of the essential nutrients that are necessary to optimize growth. If those essential nutrients are missing or lacking, then the farmer is going to fertilize the soil before he plants the seed so the nutrients are there, and he's going to supplement along the way. Now, the farmer's also going to make sure that there is a ready source of water in the event rainfall is intermittent, because we know that in the early days of a seed being planted, if there's insufficient water, the germination process never happens. So the sower at the end of the day is ultimately responsible for conducting an environmental assessment of the soil before he or she begins to sow the seed into the ground. It's their responsibility to prepare the soil not only to receive the seed, but to create an optimal environment where that seed can grow to its full potential. Now, the sower is also responsible to know the proper season for planting to help make sure the seed has the best chance to germinate and to grow. I remember my dad having a garden in the backyard, and I learned early on through a previous podcast where I destroyed my dad's strawberries. I learned early on that strawberries are planted in the fall. Now they get an opportunity to grow and establish their roots before the winter season comes in, and there they sit and they wait for the early spring. And if those strawberry plants have developed a strong root system in the fall, as soon as the spring thaw happens and water begins to flow up into the ground, those strawberry plants begin to explode and deliver strawberries in huge quantities. So knowing the right season for planting is important, because if you plant the seed outside of the right season for germination and growth, you limit the potential of the fruit that that plant is going to have an opportunity to create. So if you think about it, there's seasons of sowing, there's seasons of nurturing, and there's seasons of harvest. A good sower understands when each of these seasons is optimal and acts accordingly. Now, the second player in the story is the seed. The seed is full of potential. In the right environment and under the right conditions, a seed is going to start to germinate. Now, the germination process, if you're not familiar with it, this is the process where the seed begins to absorb water. And that water begins to initiate a metabolic process that ultimately causes that plant, that DNA wound up inside of that seed, to begin to come alive. And ultimately, that seed and the birth of that plant inside of it breaks out of the outer coating and it starts to grow. Water and oxygen and optimal temperature are critical elements to success during the germination process. That's why planting at the right time matters. Now, it's during this germination process that the seed breaks out of a dormant state, where that DNA wound up inside that seed is waiting for the opportunity to birth and start its growth to achieve its destiny. That seed comes alive with purpose as the root system, which begins to grow first, begins to find its way out of the seed and begins to burrow deep into the earth, anchoring itself to the soil. Now, why is this important? Because it is the roots, as I've shared in a prior podcast, that pulls the necessary nutrients from the earth to feed the plant so that the shoot has an opportunity to grow and then ultimately begins to flower and begins to produce fruit. This growing process is the germination process and the growth process that ultimately leads from a seed becoming fruit or vegetables that we can enjoy. So, what's the lesson of the parable of the sower? You are the sower, but you are also the seed. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. As the sower, where you place yourself matters. Because remember, not only are you the sower, you are the seed. So where you place yourself matters. What am I saying? The environment in which you place yourself is not only going to dictate the quantity of fruit that you're ultimately going to produce in your life, but the quality of the fruit you're going to produce as well. Your potential and the opportunity to rise to become the greatest version of you that you could ever become is going to be predicated on your environment. And by your environment, I'm talking about the people that you surround yourself with and the environment where you spend your time. Now, some of the people in your life may be like a roadway. They may be like the rocky ground in the parable. These are the negative, closed-minded people who are so hardened in their thinking that they're completely shut off from personal growth. Any seed, any thought of innovation, of change, of personal growth, of professional development, any seed of improvement, any thought of getting better is rejected because they're satisfied to stay where they are as they are, unchanged. These individuals give no room, even if they had an opportunity to learn and to grow and to become a better version of themselves. Why? because change is foreign to them. They're content to simply accept their lot in life and to stay as they are, and they don't want you to change either. They're willing to go through life without ever really living life. And I'm here to tell you, this is not ground for growth. Now, some of the people in your life are going to be like the thorny places in the story. These are the people who are shallow in their thinking. Now, they're okay with trying something new as long as it's the newest trend on social media. But as soon as it gets old or it demands something of them or it's no longer vogue or in fashion, they give up and they move on to the next ridiculous thing that governs their lives. So what do? They spend their days scrolling social media, mistakenly believing that social media is real life. They don't understand that it is curated snapshots of the worthless world that many of the people they follow, that they think are these great influencers, are living out. Their whole world revolves around what? The next viral TikTok challenge, who's dating who on Love Island, or the latest in celebrity gossip. These individuals are more concerned with fitting into a group who really doesn't care whether they're in the group or not, but they care so much about trying to fit in, they've forgotten about how to think for themselves or live life for themselves. These are the very people who are going to like you as long as you look like them and you act like them. You think the same thoughts they think, you say the same words they say, you watch the same movies and listen to the same music they do, and mindlessly follow the crowd. But once you start to think for yourself, once you start to grow yourself, and once you start to act for yourself, they're going to try to choke you out. Now, what do I mean by that? They're going to begin to pressure you to stop changing and start conforming. And like the thorns in the parable, they're literally going to seek to choke the life out of you, limiting your potential for growth in the process. Because they want to keep you shallow just like them, focused on the things that in life really don't matter. Now, many of these individuals want all the trappings of success, but they're unwilling to do what successful people do to actually earn the fruit of their labor. Again, these are people who go through life without ever really living real life. They're living a curated snapshot of life that they see on social media rather than really discovering their own unique black belt leader within. Now, again, this is not ground for growth. So the last place left is what? The fertile ground. So the fertile ground are going to represent the people in your life who are not only focused on their own personal growth, but they're committed to helping you reach your full potential as well. Now, this is the environment where you're going to constantly find yourself learning, growing, expanding, and striving to your full potential while being surrounded by other people who are focused on doing the same. It's in this environment of growth and expansion where you're going to find yourself nurtured and mentored and coached and encouraged by other like-minded individuals who want to become all that they can be. They want to rise to their full potential and help you do the same. It's in this environment you're going to receive all the nutrients that you need for maximum growth in your life. Well, with that, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news and the bad news is this. You're going to get to choose the environment that you're going to place yourself in, and you get to choose the people that you're going to surround yourself with. You know, my grandfather was fond of saying that you can't soar with the eagles if you spend all your time hanging out with the chickens and the turkeys. There's a lot of truth in that statement, and that's probably another podcast episode in the future, but understand this. And the parable of the sower spells that out. Where you plant yourself matters. So I believe there's three important sower questions that you need to ask yourself to make sure that you're putting yourself in an environment that's going to maximize your growth potential. The first question is this: where do you spend your time? Are you spending time with people who want to help you grow, or are you spending time with people who are focused on keeping you where you are, as you are, unchanged? The individuals that are living shallow lives and they want you to live life just like them. They're more concerned about the next reality TV show than they are about learning, growing, and becoming better at who they are and what they do. So, along those same lines, where you invest your time, you got to also ask this question. Are the activities that you're giving your time and your attention to, are they nurturing your personal growth, or are they wasting time and serving no useful purpose? Now, we're all given 1,440 hours a day, and what we do with them matters because once today is gone, we can't get it back. Once those 1,440 hours are lived, we don't get a redo. So we're either daily growing or we're not. Now, the second sower question you got to ask yourself is this. What environment do you need to place yourself in or move yourself to, maybe through a replant, in order to grow and achieve your maximum full potential? You want to find yourself or put yourself in a place where there's no expiration date on personal growth. You want to put yourself in a place and in an environment where you get to walk around with wise people and learn from them so you can become wise yourself. You know, Jim Rohn said it well. He said, we become the sum total of the five people that we spend the most time with. I like to say it this way. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. Now, the third sower question you've got to ask yourself is this. Who or what is limiting your potential? Now, to make room for maximum growth, you got to do an examination. You know, we talked about the sower doing an examination of the soil. You've got to do the very same thing, but you've got to examine your life and the life that you're living because that's the soil you're planting yourself in, life itself. So to make room for maximum growth, what do you got to do? You got to examine your relationship, your activities, your beliefs, your habits, your mindset, your choices, and the environment where you spend your time. You know, part of good gardening is not just planting the seed and preparing the ground and watering the ground. Part of good gardening is that weeding that you've got to periodically go through to remove the essential things that can take important nutrients from the ground and impede the growth of the seed as it's developing. So here's a question around that. Who or what needs to be weeded from your life that's stifling your growth or limiting your potential? You know, an oxen is a male cow. An oxen are male cattle that are trained for work on a farm. Their strength, their reliability make them valuable work animals, provided they can be broken of one thing, and that's their stubbornness. So until their self-centeredness is broken, an ox can be highly uncooperative. An ox wants to go their own way, do their own thing, and they can be hard to manage and control. But once you break them of their self-centeredness, they are one of the most cooperative animals that you can ever work with on a farm. You know, a yoke of oxen working in tandem is a powerful duo working on a farm. Because when you hitch together in a yoke, two oxen side by side, and they're working together as a single unit, their power is multiplied and they become highly effective at what they've been asked to do. So, as we're thinking along the lines of gardening and ground for growth, here's the lesson of the oxen. You want to make sure that you are yoked together with like-minded people who are not only committed to their success, but they're committed to your success as well. It goes back to what I said earlier. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Your inner circle matters. So you got to choose it well. Understand that growth requires cooperation as well as collaboration. The seed and the soil partner together to produce the plant and ultimately the fruit that can be consumed. So you've got to put yourself in an environment surrounded by the right people who are going to push you and prod you and give you the nutrients you need to rise to your full potential. Now, not only are you the sower, as I said, you're also the seed. And I believe every single individual under the sound of my voice, you've been put on this earth on purpose for a purpose. And like a seed, you have been endowed by your Creator with all that you have need of to fulfill your purpose in the earth. You are full of potential. The DNA of success resides in you, but what you do with that potential is ultimately up to you. So, first, you've got to be planted in the right environment as a seed. Because once that happens, you've got a job to do. You've got to go through the process of rooting yourself in that good environment so you are anchored and you can stay there. Because when you are anchored and you can stay in that good environment, you've got the opportunity to draw the nutrients from the soil that fuels your growth. And you've got to remain patient in the process. Now, the second thing is this. Once you're planted, you've got to remain patient and let the process of growth take its time. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Once it's planted, the Chinese bamboo tree spends the next 5 years developing an incredibly complex root system. You see little or no growth above the ground because it's all taking place underground. But after that 5th year, all of a sudden that sprout begins to push up from under the earth. All of the initial growth for the first 5 years has taken place underground. But once that root system is established and those nutrients are ready to feed that Chinese bamboo, once that sprout pushes up from the earth, it can grow to a height of 90 feet in as little as 6 weeks. So that leads me to another truth that we need to understand as the seed. There is no such thing as an overnight success. Because without a good root system, you can't have a good fruit system. Without a solid, firm foundation, being anchored in a good environment where you're pulling in the nutrients so you can continue to learn and grow and expand, your ability to produce good fruit is going to be limited. So, as the seed, where do you put your focus? You put your focus on developing the root because that's the secret to ultimately bearing much fruit. You got to remember, successful people do daily what unsuccessful people do sometimes or not at all. That's the first black belt secret of success from my book, Black Belt Secrets of Success. Focus on the root because that's the secret to bearing much fruit. Now remember, not only are you the seed, you're the sower. And as the sower, you get a say on where you're planted. But as the seed, you've got to protect your potential and you've got to steward what's inside of you. So the parable of the sower reminds us that the environment where the seed is planted matters. It requires preparation, it requires planting, it requires nurturing, it requires patience, and it requires persistence. But it also requires good seed, and you are responsible for both. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.